Um, I would like to welcome Patrick McGarry. He's currently building the thriving data community around data.world as their head of community. And prior to this, he served as the director of community for the Ceph open source project at Inktank, and later for Red Hat after a successful acquisition. Well, we've heard of that. Patrick enthusiastically helps companies to understand and adopt open source ideals through community engagement, conferences, and events. So with that, and if he's had a chance to share his screen, I'll hand it over to you, Patrick.
All right, let me get the screen sharing up here. All right, I think you should be able to see my screen now, correct?
Looks great.
Excellent, perfect. All right, well, thank you very much for having me here. I know this is a short talk, so I'll try and get us out of here on time. But you know, I hadn't planned on talking a lot about data.world specifically. I have the enviable position of being in the community side of the house, which means I don't have to make the company any money. So I just get to play with the cool toys and all the cool people doing stuff. So this was a little bit more aspirational, although I think some of this may be new, so we can speed through that and then have a bit more of a discussion if people would like to do that. So I'll jump right in. I always like to start with a few factoids at the beginning of some of my talks. Some of these may be new, some of these may not be new, but they're just some of my favorites, especially this one. The more data was created in the last few years than the sum of all human history. And this is my favorite factoid to start with because it's true every year I give a talk. So every year it just keeps continuing to ramp up and ramp up and ramp up and, you know, headed towards the zettabytes, which I'm looking forward to that one. And of all of that data that's being created, a lot of it's being done in the open with more than 18 million open data sets, depending on whose count you tend to believe. Now, you know, that's more than 10x the number of websites that existed when Google launched. You know, there you compare the world of kind of documents on the web to the world of data sets in the world. And, you know, the problem isn't that we don't have the data. You know, there's tons and tons of data that's being generated and, you know, in many cases it's being shared. The problem is that we can't find and use that data. You know, it's either hiding on a dusty FTP server somewhere or even worse, off on somebody's laptop, which is a major bummer. And so, you know, you start looking at the idea of the semantic web, you know, and like I said, it's that idea of, you know, the web was creating links between documents and data. You know, the semantic web is creating links between data. And, you know, this is not a new concept. It's been around for a couple of decades. You know, Tim Berners-Lee, I love to listen to some of the talks that he gives talking about, hey, yeah, I invented the internet. It's kind of cool. It's had some impact on the world, but really, if we can do the same thing with data, it will probably have more like 10x of an impact on the world. The nice part is, you know, the history of usage of the semantic web was always, okay, well, go get your PhD, and then we can do some cool stuff. And, you know, the barrier to entry was just so high that, you know, the general masses, that long tail of usage, just never was able to kind of jump on that bandwagon. But the interesting thing is, you know, and data.world is not the only one doing this for sure, is trying to take the ideas and the technologies of the semantic web and linked data in general and provide more accessibility. And we're seeing some really very interesting things that are coming out of this that, you know, data sets together are creating much more value than they would ever apart. And we're starting to bridge the gap between the world of open data and the world of, you know, the proprietary, closed, corporate, or whatever, you know, siloed type of data that you may find interesting. And, you know, I always like to bring the example of, well, sales and marketing data for your company is important. You know, people like to use that. But now what happens if instead of having to try to do your own demographics research, you could just take all of the very feature-rich data that the US Census collects on a periodic basis and immediately just merge that into your sales and marketing data and start asking some much more relevant and interesting questions. And so that's the kind of thing that we do, you know, and we're seeing a lot more of that just across the industry. You know, we've also done some interesting work with like the CDC, and you know, obviously the ideal is, what if, you know, cancer researchers from London, LA, and Tokyo could all share their work seamlessly, so that we could kind of get a multiplication of effort. But you know, what if there's no if? Obviously, everyone here, this is not news to you folks. You know, we're moving the needle on all of this. So you know, the open data movement is crazy. Unfortunately, you know, we're at a very interesting nexus of kind of the academic researchers, the open source world, the open data, you know, kind of the individual data enthusiasts, as well as kind of the, you know, the corporate interests and the public sector. So, you know, governments, municipalities, NGOs, foundations, and every single person that I talk to in any of those groups always says that, you know, data access across their organization or their community is still incredibly difficult. And even when you look at the idea of, you know, data science as this new exciting buzzword or new exciting industry, you know, the AI folks don't talk to the ML folks, don't talk to the deep learning folks in a lot of cases. And so, you know, it's the idea of these silos that are incredibly difficult. And, you know, we're trying as an industry, I think, to create this idea of a data-driven culture. And that's really difficult to do when you're either, you know, when you consider kind of what does the landscape look like? Are you a lone wolf data scientist? Well, okay, you can consume some stuff, you can do some work, and you share your insights, but, you know, how much impact can you have on the world? And so you start looking at, you know, modern data teamwork, and what does that look like? Okay, well, maybe you're a small, medium business, or maybe you're a small research team, you've got 5 or 10 people. And then you start looking at, you know, who are the people that are modern companies that have been building their companies from the ground up to be data driven. You know, Google and Facebook have thousands or thousands of, you know, data workers, however you might define that. You know, Amazon in particular is very good at having a lot of people digging into numbers all the time. But obviously the multiplicative ability of kind of that long tail, this is the community approach. This is the let's do with open data what open source has done with code for many years successfully. And one of my favorite examples was the idea of when you bring people and data together, there's some really exciting things that can start happening. You know, closer to home for data.world, was obviously the recent hurricane activity that hit Houston so hard. And there was a lot of stuff going on, and there was a lot of, you know, people that were trying to jump in and help, and they didn't really know what to do. And so, you know, there was this mobilization around Hurricane Harvey that did some really cool stuff. You know, people started saying, all right, the phone networks are overloaded, you know, we can't get a hold of people. And so people were actually sitting on their rooftops and tweeting about, hey, I'm here. You know, the water levels thankfully have stopped rising, but we can't get anywhere. We can't get out. And so there was actually a couple of different groups that came together and started doing some natural language processing on Twitter for saying, okay, let's find the people that are in dire need. Let's find the people that are screaming for help. But then as they started to work their way through that list, they started being able to have real impact on groups and say, all right, let's mobilize, you know, individuals and coordinate efforts to get people rescued or get people help. And then all the way down to kind of after things had calmed down a little bit, looking at, you know, well water reports and things like that. So there was all of this, you know, from NLP to the impact of, you know, where were things hardest hit, all the way down to, you know, who still has clean drinking water. So you started seeing a lot of really interesting and impactful things that happened when you put a community, a broad community, not just a focused, you know, not an organization, not an individual, but a broad community that started tackling the data when it was made available. Alyssa did some really, from the SP group, did some interesting analysis, and I think that's what you see on the right-hand side there, the picture of the kind of the hardest hit neighborhoods, you know, based on a number of different factors. And then she obviously shared all of her data so that other people could kind of double check and say, oh, hey, did you think about this? And we've actually seen multiple projects that were spawned off of her work that started saying, well, I want to do deeper analysis on, you know, public works impact, or I want to take a look at, individual, commercial housing or what have you. So it was really interesting to kind of put the power of linking data and people together. So what's next? I will share a little bit of data.world, and if people want to ask questions or whatnot, we're a free resource. We're a very GitHub model kind of thing we get frequently compared as the GitHub for data. So if you want to do things in public or kind of for the good of mankind sort of thing, create a free account and go to town. That's all you got to do. It's, the way that we stay in business is, people that want to have a lot of private data sets or really large data sets, then we ask them to help us keep the lights on. But really, as the community guy, I'm more excited about, what can we do? We have worked with groups to help fight human trafficking, or we have worked with, foundations and NGOs. We work with the X Prize Foundation to try and help their global learning initiative. Like, we're always interested in what we can do to help proliferate kind of the world of open data. And more importantly, I'm would be remiss if I didn't mention some of the work we've been doing around data practices. The data practices community was something that we started back in last November, where we basically tried to gather a bunch of visionary thinkers around the worlds of semantics and data journalism and data visualization and open source and kind of all of these different people. We put them in a room and just kind of shook it to see what would happen. And we came out of the other side with a lot of the thoughts around, hey, what can we do to start breaking down some of these silos? What can we do? What interesting things can we draw from other people's successes to help the data ecosystem and the data community start to thrive a lot more? And one thing that we focused on at that gathering and in those discussions was that, hey, the old waterfall model of development for software was really kind of broken, and it wasn't as good as it could be. And so along came this Agile manifesto, and the Agile movement, which I'm pretty sure most people have heard about at this point, kind of turned software development on its head and did a lot for modernizing software development to where we think of it today. And so we did the same thing with the idea of the data community. So we created this manifesto for data practices. It's a set of values and principles that kind of describe what modern ethical data teamwork looks like. And since then, we have, I think, over 1,500 signatories and some really notable authors that were on there. Everybody from, DJ Patil all the way to the folks on, working on Jupyter and R communities, people like Brian Granger, Fernando Perez, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really been interesting and impactful, but more than that, we wanted to move beyond words on a page. So if you remember nothing else of what I said today, just remember datapractices.org. And we're in the process of moving that out into the community. It's been community-based forever, but we just kind of threw it up on an Amazon instance in data.world's farm, and so that we could get it out there and share it with the world. But as we continue to engage with people and as this continues to evolve, we're starting to develop exercises and workshops with the community to help bring kind of modern data teamwork into places that may not be quite as modern as they would like to be. And this is all a community effort. It's not a data.world thing.
Patrick, just a quick question, since you mentioned remembering something. Are you going to make this slide deck available so that we can refer back to some of the things that you've mentioned, or should we be taking serious notes here?
No, I did send the slide deck to Carl, although I think we're missing a slide at the end there about data.world. But most of this that I would care for you to remember is all going to be made available, I'm pretty sure. Carl, you can probably tell me for
the recording will also be made available on YouTube eventually, but we can distribute the slides certainly to this group.
Perfect. That would be great. Thanks very much.
And that's great that you asked the question, because I'm done with my rambling now. I hit my 10-minute lightning talk, and so now if anybody has questions, I'm happy to make this more of a discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. That was really great to hear about what you're doing, and I think the problems from at least my perspective that you highlighted are right on. I mean, those we hear a lot about sort of big data, but I think capitalizing on the promises really requires breaking down silos. And just curious to that end, sort of what, what might be some examples. You mentioned NLP, which would be processing, a stream of data and extracting information from it and organizing it. But do you have any other examples where you're taking maybe existing data, or you're sort of looking at something on a more longitudinal basis, where you are charged with sort of archiving historic components of it, over time?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a broad question with a lot of moving parts, but there are definitely a number of different things that I could use as examples here. As far as archival goes, we've seen a lot within the governmental space in particular, and I'm thinking now especially of like ecosystem type, environmental data. So we've done a number of hackathons with various governmental groups that were afraid of their data was suddenly going to disappear, and so they put it up on data.world so it would be in a third-party repository. And to further those ends, we've actually been working with Zenodo to make sure that we could allow our community to mint their own DOIs, so that they could kind of have a better archival story. We already, version all of the data that comes into data.world and surface all of that stuff, but we're working to kind of increase our capabilities there and allow people to have more interactivity with those versions rather than just being able to, download or revert, and start looking at, how can we create the idea of a data pull request kind of thing. And so those are some of the things that we're doing in terms of, data archival, looking at streaming data and the things that you can kind of do with that. We're also looking at things like, hardware failure data. So some of you may be familiar with the Backblaze data set, which takes a look at a really wide number of hard drives and how long it takes them to fail. We're actually working with the Ceph community right now. They've built in a collection agent so that they can anonymously gather, what types of hard drives are involved in large storage clusters. And we're working with people like Cisco and a couple of others to start getting some data out there to show what the failure rate looks like and what the usage profiles lead to faster failure and things like that. So there's always, interesting stuff that's going on out there. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thanks.
Excellent.
Hi, this is John. I had a question that I'll try to frame it. Earlier in the talk, you talked about the Semantic Web, which was a way of organizing links to data that's spread around the world. As you describe data.world, it feels like you simplify things by concentrating all the data that your overlay gives access to in one place, effectively. Do you think that is likely to change, and over time you're more indexing data across the world?
Oh, absolutely. So, and even now, all of the data, our default for ease of use is that, you drag and drop your spreadsheet in data.world, or you connect up your database via JDBC connector or whatever. But we're already now seeing a lot of our clients and partners virtualize the metadata into data.world, but all of the data lives where it already lives, so we're not moving the data into data.world for a lot of our data sets. Mm-hmm. Originally we wanted the data in a single place so we could start doing some interesting things in a more simplistic way as we continued to build and scale. But we're to the point now where we're starting to do like VPC deployments and, like I said, that virtualized, let's get the metadata in so that your data doesn't have to move. This is especially important for very large data sets or for, regulatory type data sets with fintech or insurtech type of ramifications. So yes, I absolutely see a world in which we tend to index the data, but not necessarily move it in-house as we go forward. Because yeah, the semantic web stuff is really important to us. Being able to be the the Amazon recommender system where it says, hey, we see your data has this certain shape. Here's a couple of things that might be related or might help you to enhance what you're doing.
Hi.
Go ahead.
No, please carry on.
In the same vein, do you have you surely have something interesting to say about moving data, right?
About what data? I'm sorry.
Moving data. If I want to analyze a chunk of data, I need to either move it to somewhere where I can analyze it, or there's resources locally to analyze it. How do people generally get the cycles to apply to the data that you offer?
Yeah, that's still a hotbed of contention. You know, do you bring the data to the analysis or the analysis to the data, right? So it's, and it's interesting working with the AI and ML communities because, you know, they tend to think in very different ways. You know, I like working with some of my friends at Google because, you know, they're the guys that are their favorite saying is, I forgot how to count that small. You know, and so when they're working with massive data, obviously you can't move it around. So you got to figure out ways to get the compute to the data. But, you know, it's interesting, the kind of innovative tricks and things and tools that are coming out, especially in the cloud wars, right? With Amazon versus Google versus Microsoft versus Oracle, you know, everybody's got a story to tell about why their cloud is better. And I think that we're only going to see more and more sophisticated options when it comes to data and analysis and how the two shall meet. So I don't have any very strong opinions. You know, if obviously it's massive data, you want to bring your compute to it. But for me, looking at the data science landscape, it seems like the more you can do to take a slice of your data or a sample of your data, the better off you're going to be. You know, trying to do analysis on terabytes or petabytes of data just isn't practical in most cases.
Hi. Sorry, I think I missed a good part of your talk. I wanted to be here, but I just had other commitments. So forgive me if you've covered this already, but I've been following your project with great enthusiasm. I'm just curious, if you're linking up and standardizing identifiers at all, and linking back toward, you know, ontology, and specifically I'm thinking about something along the lines of Wiki Data and how you might interface with Wiki Data so that people can, you know, so that we can begin to develop this essentially standards around semantic web and stuff like that, and linkages and things.
Yeah, definitely. And now I will answer this question to the best of my ability, but keep in mind I am neither a data scientist nor an ontologist. So take what I say with a relative grain of salt. But that said, you know, we have started to roll out some of our more semantically focused features. You know, we have already in the system the idea of matching. So if you, a good example is if you upload a data set and it has a column that's called ZIP and it's all 5-digit numbers, we'll ask you, is this a US zip code? And if you say yes, we start to infer a certain amount of semantic meaning from that. You know, we'll be able to say, hey, do you want to bring in the city or the state or the census tract or the, you know, so you can immediately kind of enhance your data set automatically based on some of our in-house ontologies. We're also starting to get to the point now where we will start building the tools for people to bring in their own custom ontologies, whether this is, you know, UPC data from, you know, commercial retail stuff, or whether that's the fisheries data from the Pacific Northwest or whatever it may be. There's a lot of work to make sure that we can do custom ontologies. We have definitely talked with and about DBpedia and some of those types of things, and so we're still kind of working out what that tool is going to look like and how many linkages there might be. That said, data.world has definitely taken the stance of, if something exists and it's doing a good job, let's not reinvent the wheel. So, you know, when it comes to analysis, we tend to integrate with people like Microsoft Power BI or Tableau or, you know, Google Data Studio or whatever. We don't want to build our own analysis and be yet another tool on the landscape of already tool fatigued people. So, you know, if there's ontological tools out there, and you know, that was the subject of our CTO's doctoral thesis, so or his, you know, postgraduate work. So I'm sure he's definitely aware of it, and we're trying to not reinvent the wheel again. So I hope that rambling was close enough to an answer to get me off the hook, but keep in mind, I am not a data scientist.
All right. Well, just a point of clarification, because you said DBpedia and I said Wiki Data, and
Or Wiki Data, yeah.
And they're similar but quite different animals. And
Right.
Just want to make sure, you know, Wiki Data is really doing an amazing job of lining up identifiers. And I think that it's probably something you guys could actually make good use of.
I'm sure. I mean, I'm sorry I misspoke, but both of those have been on the discussion. There's a long list of people. There's also, you know, people that are doing visualization around ontologies like Ontodaya. Like we have a long list of people that we're trying to work in, you know, integrations and stuff with. And, you know, my background is in open source. So, you know, the Wikimedia Foundation is near and dear to my heart. So I would love to work closely with Wiki Data to make sure we're doing the best that we can for the community.
Okay, well, super. If we don't have any other questions, that's probably a good segue into the last part of our agenda. And thank you again, Patrick, for your presentation. We really appreciate that, and I can't wait to read through datapractices.org.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity, and it was great to join you guys.